So it's time to start working through our billing and service configuration, and the first thing we're going to do is set up some taxes and set up some services. So if you don't have to tax any services in the area you're in, you can skip over the taxation piece here, but for everyone else, let's run through that quick. So underneath financial and taxation, I have taxes. And Sonar supports a fairly complex hierarchy of taxation if you need it, so sort of step through this quick. I'm going to create a new tax here. And I'm going to start off by giving my tax a name. So let's say in my area I have county tax, state tax, and city tax that I need to assess. And they're all based on specific geographies, what county someone's in, the state they're in, and the city they're in. So let's start by doing a state tax. So I'm going to call it state sales tax. And our option here is percentage or flat rate. So most taxes are going to be a percentage. This is where the amount of tax is a percentage of the service amount. If instead you have a tax that is a flat rate, like $1 for every, whatever service you sell or something like that, you can set that here. But I'm going to say this is a percentage. My type here is global or geographical. So global tax will apply to everybody regardless of where they are. So if you're an ISP in the United Kingdom, for example, and you charge VAT, I would put that in as a global tax. Everybody's going to pay VAT. It doesn't matter which part of the UK they're in. In my case, I'm doing a US tax, and it's by state. This is going to be a geographical tax because it's going to depend what state they're in as to what they get charged. When I pick geographical, I get the option to set a default rate. And what this does is if I don't define a geography that fits for a particular customer, they'll get charged the default rate rather than a more specific rate. So, in a case like the state sales tax, if I do business in, let's say, Wisconsin or Michigan, I'm going to need to define what people in Wisconsin pay and what people in Michigan pay. If I then sign up a customer in, let's say, Florida, and I don't have a rate defined, it's going to fall back to the default. And in that case, I probably don't really want a default rate because there's no way to really have a default for every state. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this to 0, and then what will happen is I'll need to define my geographies specifically in order to have them apply to a customer. So let's go ahead and create this tax. So now I have a state sales tax, and I'm now within the context of that tax, and I have two tabs here, zones and details. If I go to details, you'll see the options I just set up. I can change those here. The zones are how I'm going to define my geography. So let's go ahead and start doing this, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to create a tax zone, and I'm going to call this Michigan tax. So this will come up as state sales tax when it's run on the invoices. I'm just going to make the name Michigan here. Let's say the state sales tax rate Michigan's 5%, and I want to apply to anybody with the state of Michigan. I don't care what county they're in, I don't care what city they're in, I don't care what their zip is. So I'm just going to go ahead and create this. This is a super simple zone. All I'm saying is any customer that's in the state of Michigan is going to get charged 5%. Let's just create another one real quick so you can see another one in the list here. Let's say we do Wisconsin tax. I'll say Wisconsin here. Let's say the rate's 10%. I'm going to pick Wisconsin as my state. And again, I'm going to leave my county, city, and zip blank. Let's go ahead and create that. Okay, so that was a pretty easy one for a state, but what about if there's more complexity here? If we need to charge it in a city or a county or a specific range of zip codes or something like that. So let's go back up to taxes. I'm going to click on taxes at the top here. And we're going to create a new tax, and I'm going to call this city tax. And this is going to be a percentage again. It's going to be geographical, and I'm going to have a default rate of 0. Now let's build some zones for this. So let's say, for example, in Wisconsin we have a city in Milwaukee. I'm going to say the name of this one is Milwaukee. The rate in the city of Milwaukee is 1%. And for someone to get charged this rate, they need to be in Wisconsin, and the city needs to be Milwaukee. Now I can do this even more specifically on zip or postal code matches. So there's a couple of different ways I can configure this here. If I put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, then it's going to say somebody has to be in Wisconsin, they have to be in Milwaukee, and they have to have a zip of explicitly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I check this, it's going to use this as a partial match. So then it'll say they have to be in Wisconsin, they have to be in Milwaukee, and their zip has to begin with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you have an area where everyone within a zip beginning, like 532, needs to be charged a specific rate, I could put 532 in here, check this box to allow partial matches, and then it'll apply to all of those users. So let's go ahead and create this one. And let's just do one more. Let's say I wanted to do one in Michigan for Flint, and the rate there is 25%. So I'm going to set my state to Michigan, I'm going to set my city to Flint, and I'm going to leave everything else blank. So depending on your geography, you're going to create probably multiple taxes here that define how much you charge in each area. Or if you have very simple taxation where you just do one global tax for everybody, or maybe no tax at all, we just create a global tax and do that. So let's move on to building a service or two. If I go into Financial and then Services, I can then create a new service, and a service is going to be something that I use to charge my customers some amount of money for some kind of event. So services can be one-time, where I might bill on a one-time basis for, so let's say, an install fee. They can be recurring, where I bill every month or on some preset period, like internet service. They can be expiring, where they run for a certain period of time and then they stop, and that might be if you want someone to pay something split over 6 months, for example, or something like that. Or they can be an adjustment service, where I don't know what the amount is that I want to charge up front, but I want to be able to apply some kind of charge or give somebody a credit down the line for a specific value. So let's just make a couple of services here, and I'll show you how this works. So when I create a service, first option at the top here is whether the service is active or not. If this is unchecked, the service will not be able to be applied to any new accounts, but it will still exist on any accounts that it already is on. So let's say you have an internet service that you no longer want to sell. You could come and edit it and uncheck active, and that would let all the existing accounts be grandfathered with that service, but any new accounts wouldn't be able to have it added. We need to pick a type. Type is one of these 5. So we talked about the recurring, the one-time, the expiring, the adjustment. Last one here is overage. If you're doing usage-based billing, we would need to create an overage service and set up a policy for that. And we'll do that in another series, so don't worry about that too much yet. So let's make a couple of simple ones here. I'm going to make a recurring service. I'm going to call it, let's say, Gold Internet. Application is debit or credit. Do we charge the customer, or do we give them a credit with this service? We want to charge them for internet, so I'll leave that on debit. The amount's going to be $50. Billing frequency is how often the service is charged. We're going to delve into this a lot more deeply later on in this series, but just be aware of the settings here. Generally, this is going to be on 1. You want to charge them every month. But you may have a service like a domain renewal that you only bill on a yearly basis, so I could set this to 12 months if that was the case. Since I want to bill my customers monthly for internet, I'm going to leave this on 1. General ledger code here is set to none. I don't have any other options. You can create general ledger codes inside Sonar, and these can just be any arbitrary code you want, and this is purely for financial reporting. If you today take general ledger codes and you move them into QuickBooks or FreshBooks or something like that, you can replicate those codes inside Sonar, so you can report on all your service revenue and match those codes up to what you would normally use to enter into your accounting software. So I could create a general ledger code for all my data services, for example, and every time I create a service, I'd pick that code here, and then when I run my financial reports, I'll be able to see the total of all my revenue from all the services that fit within that single general ledger code. And I'll show you how to create one of those a little later if you want it. Since this is an internet service, I'm going to say this is a data service with an upload and download limit. The only real purpose of this section is to allow us to do our Form 477. If you're not in the US, this doesn't matter to you. But it does have a little impact on other parts of the system as well. So if this is a data service, you're going to want to check this box. I'm going to say I deliver this by fiber, and the download speed is 5,000 kilobits, the upload speed is 500 kilobits. I can apply a usage-based billing policy here. That's covered in another series of videos if you want to look at this, but I don't do any usage-based billing, so I'm going to leave that on none. And then down at the bottom we have our taxes we can pick. So if you recall, a couple of minutes ago we created a couple of taxes. I'm now able to say I want to charge those taxes on this service, so I'm going to say I want to charge both. And you'll note here that this doesn't say Milwaukee or Flint or anything like we created for the zones. This is just the actual tax names themselves. So for this service I want to charge state and city tax, and then when I create a customer, depending on the geography, that will determine what the amount of the tax is as a percentage. I can also exempt a portion of the service from taxation. There's some jurisdictions where you're only allowed to tax after a certain amount. For example, in Texas, the first $25 of internet service is tax-free. So if that was the case for you, I could say $25 is exempt from taxation, and any amount over that we're going to tax. Last thing we have down here is the service metadata. In most cases you probably don't need to use this, but what this allows you to do is define certain pieces of information you want to be able to store on a per service basis and on a per customer basis. So to give you a real world example, say this was a domain renewal service, I probably want to store what the domain name is on the service itself that the customer is paying for, so I can add a field down here like domain name. And then every time the service is added to a customer's account, I'd be able to put in the domain name for that service, and that'll be displayed on the account so I can tell what service is for what. Maybe if this is a data service, I want to store some other piece of information here, like a VLAN or something else that's relevant to me. But in my case, for internet service, I don't really have any metadata I need to store. Things like the IP addresses assigned are going to be stored by using the provisioning system in Sonar. That's not a kind of thing I'd want to put into metadata, so I'm just going to go ahead and create this service. And now that I have the service created, I'm able to apply this to customers' accounts, and we're able to use this to start billing. I'm going to make a couple more here that we're going to use a little later on. I'm going to make a one-time service, and I'm going to say this is a printed invoice fee. So I'm going to use this anytime I print an invoice for a customer. I'm going to charge them a $2 fee for the invoice printing. So I'm going to go ahead and create that one. And then the last one I want to show you is an adjustment service, because that one works a little differently than other services. So the purpose of an adjustment service is to give you the ability to charge a non-predefined amount to a customer. So if you wanted to give somebody a credit for an outage, we'd use an adjustment service to do that, because you're not going to know how much you want to give up from. We're not going to be able to define the amount of the service. Same way if I wanted to charge someone a fee, and I don't know how much it is at the time that I create the service, I can use an adjustment service to be able to input the amount when I add it. So we'll go through and actually apply an adjustment service to an account a little later, but what I'm going to use this for in my case is to be able to give credits to customers if they have an outage. So I'm going to call this service credit. My application here would be credit in that case, because I'm giving the customer a credit, I'm not charging them. And the other option I have here with an adjustment service is to limit the amount that can be applied. So what I might want to do here is, if you think about the employees within your organization you want to be able to give credits, maybe I want to give them the ability to credit a couple of $100 every month, but anything more than that, it needs to go through some kind of approval process. So rather than asking everybody to do that and hoping that they do it, I can, in this adjustment service, say the most you can apply is $200 every 30 days. And Sonar will keep track of every credit that's given, so they could give one $200 credit, or they could give four $50 credits, or two $100 credits. But once it exceeds $200, they're not allowed to apply anymore. With adjustment services, I can also control who's allowed to apply it. So in this case, I could say my customer support staff can apply this adjustment, and they're able to give $200 every 30 days. And then maybe I'd make another credit called, like, escalated service credit or super admin service credit or something, where I don't limit the maximum amount, and that's only given to my super admins. Same deal down here. I can set the taxes that get applied on this. Because this is a service credit, I'm not going to have any taxes on there. So I'm going to go ahead and create that one. So now I have three pretty simple services set up. I have an internet service, a printed invoice fee, and the ability to give a service credit. So now let's move on to looking at our billing config.